Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, authorities are still trying to piece together Stephen Paddock's last movements, his motives. And while they do, many are asking, as they do after every mass shooting in the States, if this devastating event could be the catalyst for stronger gun control laws across the United States. Take a look at this.
Now, terrible things happen in the world. Sometimes, like today, we feel they've risen to a new level, but we cannot accept that as a new normal. This afternoon, the president called this an act of pure evil, and I think he's right. So what then are we willing to do to combat pure evil? The answer can't be nothing. It can't. This time it was a concert in Las Vegas. Last time it was Republican congressmen and their staff under fire on a ball field. Last week, Representative Steve Scalise returned to the floor and was greeted with a bipartisan hero's welcome. It was the kind of moment that gives you hope that Congress might work together for the common good. And the bar is so low right now that Congress can be heroes by doing literally anything. Universal background checks, or come up with a better answer. Enforce Obama's executive order that denied mentally ill gun purchases, or a better answer. Reinstate the assault weapons ban, or come up with a better answer. Anything but nothing. Doing nothing is cowardice. Doing something will take courage. But you know what? It took courage for the people at that concert last night to help each other as bullets flew. It took courage for the first responders to rush in and do their jobs. It took courage for people in Las Vegas simply to go about their day today. And now, President Trump, you've said you wanted to be a transformative president who doesn't care about the way things have always been done in Washington, D.C. This is your chance to prove it. And I mean this sincerely. You do not owe the Republicans anything. You know the Republicans tried to stop you from being president. Well, screw them. You want to make America great again? Do something the last two presidents haven't been able to do. Pass any kind of common sense gun control legislation that the vast majority of Americans want. Because if we are facing pure evil, then by all means offer thoughts and prayers. But think about what you need to do, and then pray for the courage to do it.
Stephen Paddock needed licenses for fishing, hunting and flying, but not for the arsenal of firearms he used to carry out the shooting. In Nevada, residents can own as many guns as they like and don't need to register any of them. And despite the shocking events in Las Vegas, it's unlikely to alter Americans' attitudes to guns, as Angus Walker reports.
America's been here before. Mass shootings, multiple murders, and calls for gun control. And yet 1 in 3 Americans own a weapon, with sales of military-grade assault rifles increasing. So easy to fire, even children can use them. At this gun show earlier this year, enthusiasts got to show off their firepower, reveling in their right to bear arms. 5 years ago, after the Sandy Hook school shooting, many thought enough was enough. The president wept on TV.
Among the fallen were also teachers, men and women who devoted their lives to helping our children fulfill their dreams.
But in fact, gun sales went up amid fears of new restrictions on weapons. No fear of that. This time, America's hugely influential gun lobby group, the National Rifle Association, has some powerful political ammunition.
You have a true friend and champion in the White House. No longer will federal agencies be coming after law-abiding gun owners.
In fact, this week the US Congress is due to vote on lifting further restrictions on weapons, despite pleas from the families of victims.
We have a Congress and a president that is controlled by the National Rifle Association, and they spend millions of dollars to get these guys elected. And it doesn't matter if, there is a mass murder every day. These guys are not going to enact sensible gun legislation that would prevent lives from being taken.
Again, we'll see the horror and the outrage after another mass shooting. And again, we will not see tougher controls on guns in America. Angus Walker, ITV News.
Well, let's return to our correspondent Robert Moore in Las Vegas tonight. Robert, what's the reaction there to yet another horrific shooting?
Well, James, as you would expect, obviously profound shock at the death toll last night, not least because there are concerns it may rise still further over the next few hours. But there's also a deep sort of puzzlement, if you like, about the identity and profile of the gunman himself. Stephen Paddock was 64 years old. He had no criminal record whatsoever as far as we can tell. He was a grandfather, he had a pilot's and a hunting license, but really wasn't known to law enforcement in any sense at all. And yet it appears, James, that he was had been planning this, had been thinking about executing this for some time. He'd been in his hotel room for at least 3 days, and as we've reported, he was found in that room dead with 10 rifles by his side. So we're dealing not just with an atrocity, but a law enforcement mystery as well.
And Robert, I know we ask this question every time this happens, but I guess we've got to ask it again. Is anything going to change on the gun laws?
Well, look, it reignites the debate, obviously, at a stroke. But remember this, even a criminal background check, which is the minimum that many people would expect, may not have identified this gunman. We've also, James, got a Republican Congress and a Republican president who have no desire, no appetite whatsoever to tinker with America's Second Amendment. And remember, too, there are 300 million guns in America, as many guns as there are people. So the only thing that will make any difference is confiscation, and that is politically impossible in America. Certainly it is in this state of Nevada.
Robert, thank you very much indeed.
Well, after the horror, the depressingly familiar row over gun control, the former Vice President Joe Biden led calls for Congress to step in. There's no excuse for inaction, he said. Police haven't given any details yet of the types of weapons the gunman used or how he managed to acquire them. But this latest tragedy highlights how easily guns can get into the wrong hands. Today's mass shooting in Las Vegas looks to be the deadliest in modern US history, with at least 58 people having lost their lives. It raises familiar questions around gun control and the availability of some of the deadliest weapons. Like many hotels in Vegas, the Mandalay Bay prohibits guns, but doesn't try to detect them. The state of Nevada allows concealed weapons to be carried by anyone with a license, and the open carrying of weapons in full view is also legal. It's relatively easy to buy high-velocity weapons in the US, as I discovered for myself last year after 49 people were shot dead in Orlando, Florida. So that was easy?
That was way too easy. I said, I'm from out of state. He said, that's no problem. I said, here's my driver's license. He goes, fill this form out. It took me like literally a minute to fill the form out. They ran a background check. Done.
Automatic weapons, what most people might call machine guns, are legal in Nevada if registered. The federal ban on such guns, brought in 1994, expired after 10 years. In 2016, flanked by victims of gun violence, an emotional President Obama took executive action to increase background checks. But gun violence still remains an everyday part of life. So far this year, the US has seen 273 mass shootings. If you take in all gun crime, there have been some 23,000 injuries and over 11,000 killings. Include people killing themselves, and every year over 33,000 people are killed by guns in the United States. The husband of former Democratic Congresswoman Gabby Giffords, who survived an assassination attempt 5 years ago, had this to say.
You know, we can respect the Second Amendment and the rights of responsible gun owners, and at the same time, we can keep guns out of the hands of criminals, domestic abusers, potential mass shooters and idiots. I mean, we can do that.
Many believe the killing of 20 children at Sandy Hook in 2012 would be the turning point. But since then, mass shootings have not abated. Last year's shooting at the Pulse nightclub in Orlando had been the worst in American history, until today. Well, joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Neil McCabe from Armed American Radio. Neil, we've spoken a depressingly often number of times after these sorts of mass shootings, and I know you'll never change your view on your inalienable right to hold a weapon. But let's try and focus this a bit, because this was clearly automatic gunfire. It was a machine gun. Now, let's say we accept your right to bear arms. Why do you need the right to have a machine gun?
Well, I just don't understand why you're connecting the machine gun to the crime. Obviously, it's already against the law to shoot at people and to murder people. And so if he had tossed grenades or if he had used a bomb, it would have been equally as lethal. My own sister was 10 minutes from the finish line at the Boston Marathon when over 200 people were injured by bombs. So I don't know why you're focusing on the machine gun per se.
Because the number of people killed.
It's a terrible crime.
Because the number of people have killed. If he had a semi-automatic, or if he had a six-shooting pistol, or an old-fashioned weapon, the kind of which he might have had when the Constitution was drafted, there's no way he could have injured 515 people and killed at least 58. It's the numbers involved and that's why you used to have an assault weapons ban that expired.
I appreciate that, sir. But so your contention is that if it was against the law, it would not have happened?
No, I'm saying it would just be harder if you had an assault weapons ban for a 64-year-old retired accountant to get hold of a load of assault weapons.
Right. Well, I mean, remember, during the assault weapons ban, it's not obvious to me, and during the assault weapons ban, we had the Columbine High School shooting, which was also a horrific event, and there were certainly laws against that. I mean, you have to understand that guns save lives, guns prevent crimes, and you're asking Americans to what? Disarm themselves because of an incident in Las Vegas?
Well, you know, the argument you usually throw back at us during these conversations is that you are better off with a weapon if you come under attack. That is not an argument you can use in this case, because they were being shot at from the 32nd floor with a high-velocity, long-range weapon, and there's no way they could have defended themselves.
I agree with you. I mean, there's no way you could have defended against this. This is a brutal, horrible, criminal act.
So you don't want to do anything. You just think this is one of those things you accept as the price of freedom.
It's a problem, right? This is the problem living in a free country, is that there's going to be risks involved. And, you know, those countries that we refer to as dictatorships or tyrannies are countries where they sort of pre-punish the crimes. You just had a clip, Captain Mark Kelly, the husband of Gabby Giffords, he testified before Congress that the AR-15 should be banned. And I wrote an article that 2 weeks later, he tried to buy an AR-15 for himself. And so what are you going to do with guys like this? I mean, they say one thing, and then when it comes to their own personal safety, Mark Kelly wanted an AR-15 for himself.
Well, it's always useful to talk to you at these times, Neil McCabe, because it gives us an insight into the mindset. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, tonight's main news, President Trump has just been observing a minute's silence in tribute to the victims of the Las Vegas massacre. At least 58 people were killed and more than 500 injured after a gunman opened fire with a hail of bullets on a country music festival. Well, earlier in the programme, Neil McCabe from Armed American Radio told this programme that the husband of the former Congresswoman, Gabby Giffords, had bought himself an AR-15 gun after saying they should be banned. Mark Kelly said at the time he only bought one to demonstrate the need for stricter gun laws. Now, last year, the Nevada Congresswoman, Dinah Titus, along with fellow Democrats, staged a sit-in on the floor of the House of Representatives, protesting for votes on gun control proposals. She joins me now from Las Vegas. Congresswoman, what are you thinking today about the prospect of changing the law?
Well, I hope they're positive. Today, we're not talking politics very much. We're just trying to offer solace and assistance to those who are in the hospital, their families and loved ones who are trying to find out just what happened. It's a horrendous thing to be here in Las Vegas. So many times I welcome people to my district here because of the fun and the excitement and the entertainment. I never thought I would be in a position like this, having to say how sorry we are and how awful it is.
Earlier on the program, I was talking to a member of the pro-gun lobby who couldn't see any link between assault weapons and this kind of crime. I mean, that's what you're up against.
Exactly. The NRA is very powerful as a lobby in Congress. I thought that when first grade children were shot in a school in Connecticut, or when the nightclub was shot up in Florida, surely something would spur these people to take action. We're not talking about taking away people's guns or doing away with the Second Amendment. We're talking about reasonable gun violence legislation. It has to do with multiple clips, has to do with silencers, has to do with tightening our lists so that people with mental illness can't get access to guns. That's just reasonable, and many, many gun owners support that. I'm a gun owner myself.
Now, we know that Donald Trump has changed his mind on assault weapons. Before he was in politics, he used to support the assault weapons ban, but then before the election, he became a sort of a vocal supporter of gun rights. We've seen some cooperation between Democrats and the president recently. Do you think you might be able to change his mind?
Well, I hope so. You know, he has a property here in Las Vegas. He's not an ideologue. Surely his heart goes out to the people who are here. He gave a speech about needing unity, and perhaps he will be convinced. I hope so.
Do you think this might be a turning point? I mean, this is now the most horrific, deadliest gun massacre in American history. If this isn't a turning point, what could be?
Well, that's right, and this is the third largest incident like this, and they've all happened in recent years. 58 people just gunned down for no reason out on a lovely evening for entertainment and some fun, and that number may go up because so many are still in our hospitals. We are asking people to give prayer, of course, and comfort and good wishes, but what we really need are blood donations.
Congresswoman, thank you very much indeed for joining us. And just as a postscript, it's worth mentioning that share prices in gun makers rose today because they're expecting more people to go out and buy weapons.
Well, we've got joining us now the co-president of the Brady campaign, which is a gun control pressure group, Avery Gardner. Avery, these conversations seem to come around with depressing frequency about how on earth can you stop someone acquiring an arsenal like this. Do you feel there is still hope at the national level of legislation to bring about greater control, or is the lesson of Sandy Hook or Orlando that it's just not going to happen?
That can't be the lesson of Sandy Hook. That can't be the lesson from Orlando, and it cannot be the lesson from Las Vegas. It's not just mass shootings, as horrible and terrifying as they are. It's that every day in America, we lose 93 people to gun violence. Every single day.
Often this is painted as citizens, particularly those who've been bereaved in these tragedies, going up against lobby groups like the NRA. But how far do you feel the battle to convince gun owners, millions of gun owners who want to own these things, even assault weapons, has yet to be won? That there's a key battle in terms of changing a broad swathe of public opinion?
That's exactly right. There are two parts to what we're trying to do here to stop the epidemic of gun violence in America. One is really focusing on the system that we've created, systems of laws that we have in the United States, to make it much more difficult for dangerous people to get their hands on guns. Because frankly, it's really darn easy in the United States today for somebody who wants to get a gun and do harm with it to get one. So that is absolutely at the forefront of what we are doing every day. But equally importantly, we need to change the conversation here in the United States. We need to have a conversation that brings together people who own guns and people who are opposed to that, that's consistent with our Second Amendment constitutional rights, and really understand the dangers that arming everybody, having them carry guns everywhere they go, at all times, in all places, is not going to make us a safer nation. It's going to make us more dangerous. And if we can't engage with gun owners in that discussion and debate, we're going to be limited in the progress we're going to make. So that's another area that we focus on a lot.
Avery, look, you've been involved in this struggle for a long time. You've seen ups and downs. You surely can't be too optimistic that this White House will be the administration that takes this forward on a national level. What hope do you have that states and cities where there are tighter gun control regimes can be persuaded to carry this forward at the local level, and by doing so perhaps show that there's a virtuous circle to greater gun control?
Well, the first thing I'd say is I would give up predicting anything about what happens with this White House. But your point about the state and local level is a really important one. 19 states have now expanded background checks on gun purchases to cover much more than what's covered under federal law. And in fact, in Nevada, the people of Nevada voted for that last year in a ballot initiative that passed last November, even as President Trump was also being elected. Now, unfortunately, state officials there decided that a technicality prevented them from implementing the will of the voters in Nevada. But that's what it takes. It takes the will of the voters in America. And that happens in cities, it happens in states, and it is going to happen nationally so that we stop this from continuing to happen in America.
Avery Gardner, thank you. Let's see if that Nevada law does get pressed into effect now.
More Yasmin Alibay-Brown, Brendan O'Neill are here. One story, of course, dominating, despite the Tory party conference, despite the collapse of Monarch, and that is the one described by President Trump, as we know, as an act of pure evil.
Yeah, well, it's just terrible, and I think everyone agrees it is an act of pure evil. I think Trump's words really hit home for once. Yeah, it's terrible. I think it opens so many questions. I mean, first there is the question of how someone could do something so utterly, unspeakably chilling. You know, he apparently laid in wait for days, so this was planned. He waited a long time for his opportunity to do what he did. He was firing his gun for, people are saying, 10 minutes, and you think, what kind of calculated mind can do something like that for so long without switching off or having some kind of moral block on his behaviour? So it's deeply disturbing, and I think it's going to open a whole lot of political, moral questions, and it's going to cause a lot of divisions and discussion in the US in the next few months, I have no doubt.
We've got a new picture in, actually, of the alleged perpetrator of this, Stephen Paddock. So many stories coming out about him, but fundamentally, as we heard from his brother earlier, he was a normal guy who liked gambling.
Yes, but I think this is what's interesting and important to think about. You know, most of the coverage is why did somebody did this do it? And I think that is a very important question to always ask when there are mass killings. Incredibly, though, and sadly, that when there is, you know, somebody who has brown-skinned who does that, the word terrorism is straight away slapped upon him, and it is often a him. And I wonder why we either do that too quickly with, you know, like that 18-year-old or the Manchester bomber who did exactly this, and why we don't look underneath into their heads too. We need to. We need to know what's going on in our world that is creating these. This is different, isn't it, from some of the school killings we've had?
But I think this is one of the questions that's going to be thrown open by this act, which is why some things are called terrorism and other things aren't. I disagree.
Is it a political motivation?
Yeah, I disagree that everything should be called terrorism. I think there's a difference. Not all acts of mass murder are terrorism. Sometimes they are just in quote marks, acts of mass murder. And this looks like, from what we know so far, simply to be an act of mass murder. Terrorism is something different. Terrorism is political, it's ideological, it's about, I mean, of course this act act will have terrorised people, and people will feel sick and scared for a long time to come. But the aim of this act, as far as we can tell, is simply to kill large numbers of people in a very nihilistic fashion.
But you see, what I'm saying is, I don't disagree with you.
Is to have an ideological corrosion on the stability of society itself.
But I think too often there are lone Muslim men who do it for no ideological reason. They are, you know, whatever they're trying to do, there's something going on in their heads, in their lives. And what I think would be fair and good is, before we jump and slap this label on every time there's a person who happens to be Muslim, and let's not do that. Let's find out whether he was the first kind of killer, like you described, a madman, or a proper terrorist. That, I think, is a distinction we must now make.
I think there is some crossover between this kind of act that's happened in Las Vegas and terrorist acts that we've seen recently. Some terrorist acts are actually quite similar to mass shootings and school shootings, and there's no clear political reason. But I do think it's worth maintaining a kind of linguistic, moral distinction between different forms of violence.
Absolutely.
And I don't think society benefits from blurring everything together, because it makes it more difficult to understand the threats that we face.
But what I'm saying is, we still don't know, right, with this 18-year-old boy, what was going on in his head, the one who left the thing in Parsons Green, right? But within seconds, he was being branded a terrorist.
But that did happen. That was like the fourth attempted attack by someone who presumably
and we have to
had...
be careful, because that's an active investigation, quite clearly, as well.
Yeah, so what I'm saying is the press needs to be as fair as it can be. And you were saying the moral difference, the ideological difference is important.
But I think questions are asked, aren't they? Even if somebody is a self-confessed Islamist, we find out where they went, what inspired them. I think the questions are asked.
But we're not ever interrogating them, the questions, enough in that first moment. And I think that's what I'm saying, that I think...
But questions of family instability or suggestions...
We don't ask them.
For example, well, I think we do. Stephen Paddock, for example, his brother said, was a bank robber who was once on the most wanted list.
No, we do. We absolutely
are now,
do.
and I think we do then as well.
I don't think we always do, when the instinctive label immediately afterwards is stuck on of terrorism.
But there's no avoiding the fact that there has been a pattern in Europe of Islamist-inspired terrorist attacks, which over the past 3 years have killed more than 450 people. That's a huge number. They all, for the vast majority of them, swear allegiance to a particular group, a particular idea, and their aim is to cower society or to make citizens feel politically and ideologically threatened. Now, the difference between that and school shootings in America or mass shootings like this...
But there are some lone killers. We've had lone killers from Muslim backgrounds who weren't connected to anything or anybody, OK? And what I'm saying is, let's be fair. Let's make the same distinctions. I completely agree with you. I would never deny Islamist terrorism, for goodness sake. You know, it's there and it's dreadful and it's destroying everybody's lives and peace.
But even in Brussels and some of the attacks in Belgium, we have gone back to find out, for example, that some of these people were low-life petty criminals. They had periods of joblessness. They lived in a difficult suburb of Brussels. The background of people, you know, we have gone into that.
I think we don't do it enough here. In Germany, they're brilliant. But we did do it a bit more with the Manchester killer.
In the meantime, back to this story. Pictures, horrifying pictures you can see of people trying to almost climb over each other, or they fell onto each other to, as the Sun puts it, to run away. Well, the paper here says 20 rifles in the 32nd floor suite. I think the police have admitted to 10 so far, haven't they? And the question is, what is a society where you can carry guns through a casino and up to the 32nd floor and fire at a concert of 22,000 people?
Yes, I think I have a difficulty with this question, because for me the bigger question is what would make someone do this. I think sometimes the focus on guns and the question of whether they should be banned is
it's an accessibility issue.
Or the accessibility to guns. I think it's a focus on technical means rather than the darker moral question.
You're almost following what the National Rifle Association would say.
The moral question, Brendan, is don't have so many guns in the population. That's the moral thing.
No, I'll put my cards on the table. I'm in favour of the Second Amendment. I think the Second Amendment is a good idea. It's a progressive
Then it's not a moral position.
And I think that the problem with the obsession with guns themselves is that it overlooks far more difficult questions of why it is in modern society, this didn't happen really prior to the 1960s, and that's not just because weapons have changed, but the phenomenon of mass shootings and the phenomenon of school shootings, if you look at the history of them, they are a very modern phenomenon. So it speaks to something...
It's just obfuscating.
No,
the number of guns, 33,000 Americans killed in a year. If people didn't have this number of guns freely, they wouldn't be dead.
If American individuals like this man, thankfully, tiny numbers of American individuals are willing to kill scores and scores of their fellow citizens, I think it's a fantasy to think that banning or restricting access to guns will solve that question. And I think, in fact, what that would do is avoid the question. I mean, look at China, for example.
We haven't
China has extremely strict controls on guns,
let's just be
but
here.
they have mass stabbings of children in particular.
Listen,
so there is a phenomenon that needs to be addressed beyond the means.
We haven't got in this country 33,000 people who were killed with guns this year. We haven't. The reason is people don't have guns. Don't go to China, stay here. There's a difference. We're very similar people, all right? We're very similar populations.
I think it's as foolish as saying we should have banned aeroplanes after 9/11. That would be to focus on the tool that was used rather than the questions that are raised.
What about the fact that with a knife, you kill individuals, and it would take a long time to kill that many people. With an automatic or semi-automatic weapon, you can gun down large numbers.
Guns are extremely strictly controlled in European countries, and over the past 3 years, terrorists have killed 450 people, far more than this man killed in Las Vegas.
33,000 in America.
With bombs, with knives, with guns in the
Why do you focus on terrorists and not domestic killings?
Because we are talking... We're
talking about guns.
No, we are talking about mass killings and the difference between different forms of mass killings, and the question of whether the key focus should be the mechanism that is used to carry out a mass killing, or why these things happen in the 21st century.
Both are important.
And I think that my problem is that we have a very cavalier attitude to America's founding freedoms, and whether we like it or not, one of those founding freedoms, the second one straight after freedom of speech, which I'm sure we all agree is a good one, the second one is the right to bear arms in
when does that date from, though?
Well, of course, it dates prior to the existence
when they were massacring Native Americans.
No, prior to the existence of these kinds
Wild West
of weapons. Yes. But I would have a problem with the state having a monopoly on weapons. And that's what is suggested by people who are opposed to the Second Amendment. Let's not forget that huge numbers of killings in America are carried out by the police. And huge numbers of people feel safer because they are able to arm themselves. So I think the argument, and in fact, the argument in favour of gun control, historically speaking, was a very right-wing argument. It was particularly used, again, in the post-slavery era. It used to be a racist
argument. I do not believe you're putting these arguments on a day like this. I've never argued with you like this. I've never felt so enraged that on a day like this, you are evoking, a kind of past which was way back then when actually hundreds of thousands of people were being killed. Listen, change your mind.
This is the day...
You will still be a man.
This is the day in which you should have those kind of discussions. The key discussion being, what is it that is the cause of these problems?
Guns.
No, it's not guns.
It's
because guns have existed for far longer than the phenomenon of modern mass shootings have existed. And I think there's a real sense of moral evasion in this very simplistic, knee-jerk suggestion that if we ban guns or make it harder to get guns, all these problems will be solved.
Don't put the shine of morality on your position. It is a deeply immoral position.
This is moral evasion in favour of technical solutions to what is a profound problem.
You're so brainwashed about the Second Amendment that you don't see what you need to see.
We need to take a break. The White House has said it is premature to debate guns in America. Perhaps we should have followed suit.
Yeah, it's awful. And the images that are coming out and some of the facts that are coming out are dreadful. I mean, the suggestion or the report that he fired into this crowd for 10 minutes is astonishing. And he seems to have planned it incredibly well. He had a huge number of guns in that room. Apparently he had a huge arsenal back at home too. So this is a man who was hell-bent on causing chaos and death and destruction, and he succeeded. And I think it will throw open a huge number of questions for America and for everyone. Moral questions, political questions, My feeling is that the answers so far have been a bit too simplistic, but I think those questions are being asked and will continue to be asked about how something, or more importantly, possibly why something like this is happening today.
So you ask the question, do you, that the Daily Mail is asking, as we see this latest image of the man purported to be the killer on the 32nd floor.
Apparently he had gambling debts, but that you don't turn into a mass killer because you have gambling debts. But it, you know, it does, as I says, you know, it does make you question how many more massacres will America go through before it starts considering what these gun laws are doing to their nation and to their young people. These were young people. These were young people having like the Manchester bomber, having a good time. You know, it's just such a big question now.
Well, the picture about him, Stephen Paddock, is confused. Apart from his 64, he lived in what was described as a nice Nevada retirement community where the amenities included golf, tennis. He was a multi-millionaire real estate investor, so his brother said. Recently shipped his 90-year-old mother a walker and liked to travel to Las Vegas to play high-stakes video poker. His family say they are dumbfounded how this man suddenly became America's worst mass killer.
I think that will be one of the biggest questions that people will want to probe into. What happened to this individual? What sent him over the edge? I think Yasmin's absolutely right. Gambling debts doesn't do this. I mean, lots of people have gambling debts and they don't go and kill 58 people or 59 people. So there are a lot of questions to be asked. I just think we have to be careful how we frame it. You know, when Yasmin says, you know, the gun laws did this, the gun laws didn't do this, and there's a real danger when we have this kind of immediate response which says guns should be banned or access to guns should be made more difficult. There's a danger there where we actually let the perpetrator, him or herself,
why does anybody need to own these kind of guns? Why? If you are, you know, if you're living in a country which is a democracy, which is safe, which is secure, what is this obsession with thinking freedom means freedom to own guns?
Well,
explain that to me. I don't understand it.
Hold on one second, because columnists like Yasmin, maybe not Yasmin specifically, but other columnists like Yasmin were telling us a year ago, 6 months ago, that America was turning into a 21st century Nazi regime with Trump in power, and we were told all these, what I considered at the time to be slightly hysterical...
What's that got to do with it?
Well, they were slightly hysterical scare stories about how America was turning into this tin pot tyranny, the like of which we haven't seen since the 1930s.
Let's talk about guns. You're finding every reason not to talk about guns.
What I'm saying,
I'm asking you a question.
Saying. You cannot say in 1 month that America is becoming this tyranny.
I haven't said it.
And in the next month, no, but people...
I'm saying to you, what is this obsession with guns?
That America
Why don't we need them here? Why don't you? Do you have guns?
Columnists are arguing that America is becoming an extreme authoritarian regime. What they don't realise is that that's one of the justifications for the Second Amendment, whether you agree with it or not. Yasmin clearly disagrees with it. One of the justifications is the right of people to arm themselves in case of tyranny. Now, I'm not saying...
Why don't we have guns in this country? Are we not a democracy?
Well, make it more specific. Why don't we have semi-automatic or automatic weapons, which seem to be used in the circumstances?
I'm not saying
extra weapons now.
I'm not saying this is a simple issue, and I'm not saying guns are a good thing. I'm not saying anything like that.
So would you support the Second Amendment under any circumstances in the United States?
I think the Second Amendment is a very important part of the American Constitution. But what I would argue right now, on a day like this, which we can all agree is an incredibly bleak day, is simply that the focus on guns, in my mind, smacks of moral evasion, because it's a focus on the technical means of mass murder rather than the question of why this very modern phenomenon...
They died because of the guns.
No, they didn't.
They died because of the guns.
Well,
even if he was crazy, even if he was completely loony, even if he hated the world and he wanted to kill, he couldn't have achieved this number of deaths without that weapon. Those weapons.
So take it a step back.
You are absolving him of responsibility for his crime.
So say people are allowed guns. Should there at least be background checks on people?
Yes, I don't have a problem with people being asked questions and so on and so forth. I don't necessarily think guns should be something you can buy in Tesco's, for example. But what we've got to talk about is, firstly, the principle that exists in America for various historical reasons that the state shouldn't have a monopoly on arms. I agree that the state shouldn't have a monopoly on arms. But the more pressing question right now is the way in which I think the focus on guns, the focus on the tool that was used, is often a way of avoiding the far bigger question, which is why it is that in America, in the modern period, largely from the 1960s onwards, this didn't happen in the past, citizens feel so disconnected or so nihilistic or so distant from the idea of America or from their fellow citizens or whatever else it might be, that they are willing to kill so many of their fellow citizens. That's a difficult, difficult moral question.
You can ask those questions at the end, whatever they feel. They're able to do this because there are too many guns in too many hands in America, and no other Western democracy feels the need to have this arming of its citizens in the way you've described it.
I think if someone is willing to kill so many people in such a callous, calculated, horrific way, they will find a way to do that regardless of what weapons they can access. In Europe, over the past 3 years, there have been more than 450 deaths at the hands of ISIS activists or people who swear allegiance to ISIS, with bombs, guns, knives and so on, and cars and vehicles and lorries. A truck in Nice killed more than 80 people.
33,000 people in America.
A truck in Nice killed, hold on, a truck in Nice killed more people than this man killed in Las Vegas. So if we are going to say ban trucks? Now, I don't say that to be glib. What I'm saying is the question I would like to ask in relation to Nice, in relation to Las Vegas, in relation to Paris, in relation to Manchester Arena, is not simply how did they get these substances? How did they get these weapons?
But we are talking about how they got substances in Manchester Arena. How did they get the explosives? For example, in this case, we've just heard from the Sheriff, Jose Lombardo, that several pounds of ammonium nitrate, a material used to make explosives, was found in this man's car.
My point is that you can put blocks on people buying acid, you can put blocks on people buying the ingredients for a bomb, but that does not absolve the far broader, bigger, more pressing question of why we have these modern acts of terrorism in the European case and these modern acts of mass murder in the American case. There's something else going on, and I just think it's an unwillingness or an inability to grapple with that, which often means that we prefer to talk about what they used to carry these acts out.
I think
that's my issue
wrong.
right now.
You're completely wrong. We are talking about what's in the heads of these people or the terrorists, but if you're telling me that arms and guns are not subjects for discussion when such terrible things happen, and not just here, in the Muslim countries as well. We're selling arms to these countries and people are being massacred. We have to talk about weapons.
That is a bigger issue. In some respects, it doesn't matter what we think about it. It's whether this is, for Mr. Trump, a Sandy Hook moment, as that awful massacre of 6- and 7-year-olds was for President Obama. Will he take stock, do you think, away from the NRA mantra of, you know, guns don't kill people, people kill people, which is effectively what you're saying?
But that is actually true. It is actually true.
It's it's what you think, and he thinks.
But, you know, the question for America, I think, is, firstly, why did this man do this? What happened? What went wrong? That's the most important question. But the other question is America, are we going to okay the undermining of people's constitutional rights on the basis of what certain individuals do? That's the question that must be asked. Now, in Britain, we might sometimes rather snootily, if Yasmin will forgive me, look down upon these constitutional rights that they have in America and say, well, we don't need them, why do you need them? The fact is they have them.
Yeah, but
in America,
constitutions were written by men.
In America, they have the constitutional right to freedom of speech.
And hundreds of years ago,
hundreds of years ago. Things are not. These weren't tablets of stone Abraham threw down to earth.
Of course not.
Of course.
But
so
they
embody
very progressive values, which is freedom of speech, the right that your house...
To own weapons is progressive.
No, hold on, if you let me finish. Freedom of speech, the right that your house and your possessions will never be searched without a warrant, and the principle that the state should not have a monopoly on arms. This is the bit of the Constitution that people forget. They think it just says, oh, anyone can go and buy a gun. It's a principled piece of legislation which actually does come from the United Kingdom. It comes from the English Civil War and the Levellers in particular, who argued that if Parliament got above itself, then the people had the right to take action.
I think
that is
we
what
are now,
inspired
we're
the
not
Second
living
Amendment.
hundreds of years ago. We're not in the middle of a civil war. We're not in the middle of the American War of Independence. We are living in modern times. Constitutions are not set in stone.
I think to remove American people's constitutional rights, whether we think they're good rights or not, in response to what happened today, would be as bad as it would be to ban people from driving in France because of what happened in Nice. You cannot undermine everyone's access to whatever they want to own
let's make
on
me
the
a table.
basis of certain individuals.
Brendan, make me a table. How many people have been killed willfully with cars and trucks, and how many have been killed with guns and weapons? Just make me a list, and let's look at the numbers. Can that be your homework?
We're talking about the use of various different means to kill people, mass numbers of people.
You're
struggling
with that
no, that's a modern phenomenon.
15,000 killed by guns in America last year, just to add to just to do some of your homework for you.
And one of the means through which people are killed is by the police and by the state. Now, I have a problem, as someone who is a libertarian and a liberal and who doesn't like the state to be too powerful, I have a problem with the implication that is made by people like Yasmin, which is that the state should have a monopoly on weapons. That, I think, is a dangerous... Why? You trust the American state?
The loonies, the millenarians, the crazies in the whole world. I don't want them to
You trust the American state under Donald Trump? I don't.
Well, actually, I do, because it's not just Donald Trump. There's checks and balances. There's checks and balances. He's not been able to do anything he's promised to do so far, because there's checks and balances.
The vast majority of Americans who own guns are peaceful citizens who never use them wrongly. Now, to undermine their constitutional rights on the basis of one man's behaviour is an overreaction. That's
not one man. OK, meanwhile, Nevada's governor has signed a declaration of emergency for Clark County, Las Vegas in other words, and has also signed a public health disaster declaration to allow doctors and nurses from elsewhere in America to work in Nevada. That is the scale of this incident, certainly.
Well, an horrific crime with no obvious motive leads us on, I suppose, doesn't it, to the mass shooting in Las Vegas. Let's bring in Charlie Wolfe, who's an American political commentator, who joins us now. As you see, Charlie, very good afternoon to you.
Hi.
We were just talking to Sam Kiley, our Foreign Affairs editor, who's in Washington, asking about the politics of this thing. Where do they go?
Well, I think the president was right the other day to say, let's give it a rest for a change. Let's grieve. Let these people grieve. We constantly get this. And listen, I understand it. You know, it's a shocking event. People are shocked, so they're going to react the way they do. But it is, in a sense, a knee-jerk reaction. It's a natural knee-jerk. Right? I don't want to sound like I'm being flippant about it. But you get the same arguments. Banning all guns, which isn't going to happen, or people in this country may not understand our Constitution, say, well, why can't you just get rid of the Second Amendment, not understanding the implications or even how it would be done, if it could be done at all.
Charlie, what are the implications? You know, the Second Amendment was written at a time when guns had one bullet, and you know they served a purpose.
But there's more than that.
Technology has changed so much.
Yeah,
since
but
then.
the Constitution is talking about securing liberty and freedom, and it's saying that we have a natural right. These were natural rights. Wasn't the government saying, well, we're going to allow you to do this. It's saying we recognize, you know, they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, amongst these life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And this is the right of self-defense. So as long as it's being used in a moral way, in a responsible fashion, I mean, if you knew me as a responsible person, I walked in here with a gun, you know, and we know each other, are you going to be necessarily worried that I'm going to suddenly flip it? You know, of course not. But
I'd be quite worried, actually,
well,
if someone walks in here with a gun.
It's not somewhere you normally, but I mean, if maybe I was coming in to do a display on it and I brought in you know, you're not going to feel that unsafe because you know, hopefully you know me as a responsible person, and most gun owners are. You know, these rights are the Bill of Rights. This is the first 10 amendments, and if you can mess with that one, why not say free speech, First Amendment?
You know, that's an ideological argument. There's a practical argument that's advanced as well, Charlie, and you're familiar with it, aren't you? Which is that, look, if you carry a weapon and somebody, maybe a terrorist, maybe a more bog-standard criminal, is wielding a firearm, you've got the ability to challenge that person before the state can intervene in the form of law enforcement officials. That doesn't apply here, does it? And that's why this is particularly difficult for the gun lobby.
No, what this guy did
if you've got a handgun,
the Second Amendment does not cover what this man did in any way, shape, or form.
let me just finish my point. You know, you're on the ground, you may have a handgun, maybe some people in that crowd did. You can carry in Nevada. Somebody's up there, you can't reach them with a handgun. You know, so just in terms of the practical dimension to this, fighting fire with fire, this was an unequal struggle from the beginning.
Well, not every struggle is going to be equal, but hopefully there are cases where it does become the equalizer, as it was known in the film. You know, the story a couple of years ago, a woman on her own with her children in a trailer, lost her husband the day before to cancer, had all these drugs, and this guy had come around, I think he knew her and was trying to hassle her, calls up the police, and she said, honey, we can't get a car out to you for at least 15, 20 minutes. And he said, well, what do I do? He said, well, I can't tell you what to do, but you do whatever you think is necessary. She took the shotgun and shot it through the door, killed the one guy, and the other guy ran off, saved her life. So it does serve a purpose, you know, but I don't expect a gun to serve every purpose as a weapon of protection. You know, if someone would fly a plane into Sky Center, you know, there's nothing I can do, gun, bazooka, whatever, that's going to stop that. So, but as long as I act responsibly, I have a right to that, whether I want to use it to protect myself, if it's needed, or I want to go out the back and shoot targets, or I just want to hang it up on the wall.
But if this right to defend yourself, the liberty to carry a gun, to go out into your garden to shoot targets, doesn't the right to life trump all of that? And the fact that by carrying a gun, you are more likely to die yourself because you just by the very merit that you have it, you're more likely to take it from you and kill you.
There is a right to life.
And you're more likely to kill somebody else than if you didn't have the gun.
Not necessarily. I mean, again, I would hope that I would be a responsible owner, and the majority of people I know, the vast majority, are responsible. I mean, I don't know too many people.
But do you not think a 64-year-old accountant would have been seen as a responsible owner?
Well, we don't know. I mean, obviously, in hindsight, we're seeing some things about him that I find disturbing. He had massive gambling debts. I mean, this is a guy that had $2 million, amassed a fortune, but had no art on his walls. I mean, he just lived in this sort of barren. He didn't sound quite right. And again, who's going to stick a gun out a window and start shooting down, like taking people like fish in a barrel, as they say? So, you know, I think we do need to step back. And yes, anything that will find these people. You know, I don't want to see less guns. I just want to see less Stephen Paddocks. You know, no one's in favor of allowing what we saw happening in Vegas, no matter what your position on guns, to be in favor of that sort of thing. But I want to be able to secure my liberty at the same time as protecting someone else's liberty as well. And you can find that, I'm more than happy.
Charlie Wolf, good to see you. Thanks very much for coming in.
But before we go, we do want to briefly return to the horrific events in Las Vegas last night. Now, 9 years ago, the eminent US forensic psychiatrist Park Dietz appeared on Newsnight to offer the television media his list of do's and don'ts when it comes to how we in TV news cover mass murders like this one. Parts of the interview have been shared online quite a lot today, and we thought it was worth reminding ourselves of exactly what he thought. Good night.
We've had 20 years of mass murders, throughout which I have repeatedly told CNN and our other media, if you don't want to propagate more mass murders, don't start the story with sirens blaring. Don't have photographs of the killer. Don't make this 24/7 coverage. Do localize this story to the affected community and make it as boring as possible in every other market. Because every time we have intense saturation coverage of a mass murder, we expect to see one or two more within a week. Do everything you can not to make the body count the lead story, not to make the killer some kind of anti-hero.